Hello.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
Great. Welcome, Hristo Borisov, co-founder and CEO at Payhawk. You are a pride of Bulgaria. You are the country's first unicorn. How does that feel?
How to say? I mean, obviously, it is a great milestone for us and for the country, but I think the important thing is that we should all work together to make the next 10 unicorns. If you look at a company like Estonia, Tallinn is a city of just, let's say, 400,000 people, and they have, I think, 12. So I think the potential is for a lot more. And it is a good milestone that we are the first, but hopefully there will be a lot more coming, and we'll be really changing the startup economy and the real economy in general in Bulgaria and the region.
You mentioned Estonia. There is a lot of growing interest in Central and Eastern European technology innovation and ecosystems. So from your experience, have you noticed that interest start to pick up from other parts of the world in terms of investments and setting up here in country?
Yeah, definitely. I think what's happening is that there are a huge amount of venture capital being invested across Europe. And the Western Europe markets is getting saturated in terms of companies you can fund. And usually investors are trying to find new spots of growth, and that has been, to a big extent, Central Europe. But now we see a lot more looking at Eastern Europe, especially because of companies, for example, like UiPath in Romania, that just did a massive IPO last year, valued at 32 billion. Just for over 4 years. So they start to see these kind of big success stories coming out of the region. And this is something that is sparking their interest, and they're looking for even earlier stage companies where they can be the first institutional investment, which has been very rare for the last, let's say, 3 years ago. We would never see Western European VC writing the first institutional check to a company based in, let's say, Eastern Europe. And now we see a lot more, especially for funds like Early Bird and others that are looking for this. And then when we get to the Series A, Series B, we start to have this kind of bridge financing. Because I think one of the challenges in the local ecosystem has been that we, right now, I think, have 16 funds that are financing early stage companies. But really the big struggle is once those companies, let's say, raise 2-3 million, how they get to the next stage, where they have to raise 10, 15, 20 million to go and attack the Western European markets. And that bridge is really, really hard. That is something that it would be hard for an economy like Bulgaria to construct as infrastructure on its own, just because the local market is not that big enough to have constantly companies that need 20, 30 million of venture funding.
Well, I posed this question to Martin earlier when we first sat down, which was about the global economic landscape, red-hot inflation, lots of concerns there, the war in Ukraine, which is, again, very close by. How worried are you?
Well, first of all, we raised our latest round in March because we knew that it is good to have a war chest and to be well-funded, given that the economy is changing. I think there has been a huge amount of, obviously, money printing and, programs fighting the COVID situation. And now we're getting to a stage where the market is realizing that, things are overinflated. There is a correction. So I think money are still out there. And I think the next month is going to be really telling, the next month and a half, of how the rest of the year is going to play out, especially as the Q2 forecasts of the companies are going out. If companies on the technology sector in the States and across the different markets start hitting their forecasts and even exceeding their forecasts, that would be a big sign that, hey, there is a correction, but those companies are still growing fast. And I think that will be a very good kind of signal. But on the other hand, I think it's going to be a massacre if the tech companies really miss their forecast by a lot. That is going to trigger even more stagnation, and a lot of other VCs are going to prefer to stay out and not to invest money on the market right now.
That's really, really interesting. So we're already starting to see companies go under. We're already starting to see some chatter about the possible need for rescues or bailouts. We've already seen companies like FTX intervene. Do you think we could see more of this? Could we, again, see the need for more interventions to keep the industry afloat?
I think that's why I mentioned the Q2 event, because I think we have been only in this situation for the last, let's say, 6 months, right? And before that, in December, or let's say end of November, the situation was kind of great. Money were cheap.
Yes.
People were raising capital.
Oh, that time's over. The decade of cheap money is gone.
Yes, that is fine. But I think the key thing is that all those companies did have reserves and capital, and we're going to see after the next 6 to 9 months, we are going to really see some companies getting to a struggling stage if they are not able to raise capital and if the market situation doesn't improve a little bit.
Meaning the firms are over-leveraged?
I don't think startups are, I'm talking about the startups ecosystem because this is where I have the biggest insights, but I don't see that many companies being that much leveraged. I do though see that the multiples and the valuation, especially in the financial services market, were slashed by the biggest factor out of any other asset classes. That is because of credit. You can see companies doing lending, companies doing credit, companies doing financing are really getting a big toll right now because of the high interest rates that are coming. Other companies that are doing, let's say, healthcare or other things, I don't think are that much impacted by that environment.
Okay. So in terms of, again, going back to the possible need for interventions, when it comes to decentralized finance, the whole concept behind it is that there's no central authority, no central bank. So there's no lender of last resort. So ultimately, it's a sink or swim situation when you are.
Well, I think my general thinking about blockchain, crypto, and decentralized finance is that we should look back in history and look at the adoption curve and the technology life cycle of any innovation.
Okay.
And it always starts with a technology trigger, right? You come up with something new, and this is in the time people are saying, now this is going to change the world. And the next stage after a technology trigger is that it peaks expectations, right? So you get to the peak of the expectation. Everybody thinks that everything tomorrow is going to be crypto or Web3 and so on. But then there is actually the realization that there is actually nothing still practical to be used out of this technology, right?
Utility.
So you go back and then become the slope of alignment and productivity. This is where you actually start to make some practical use of that technology. And I still think we're somewhere in the hype. We are still excited about the technology, not what it means for the practical perspective on the market. And as soon as we start to find some more use that is proving economic value, that is not at the cost of huge energy requirements, this is where we are going to see a lot more into that technology.
Elon Musk, of course, famously said that he was concerned about the environmental impact, and there's yet to be a firm solution around that. So that's a very good point. So let's double down a bit on your point around utility and value and establishing that. Emerging markets, big potential there to establish the utility and value case. India, for example, maybe El Salvador.
Yeah, I think the emerging markets are definitely at a very good situation because what is happening, especially in Europe, is that we have a very well integrated economy that is becoming more and more integrated on a daily basis for different things that are happening. Even now, the geopolitical situation is actually bringing and removing a lot of boundaries that existed before. And that is actually giving the opportunity for companies based out of the region to really put together a very competitive advantage versus their Western European companies by having, they can stay under the radar for a lot of time. They can really invest a lot of time for R&D, which is going to be a lot more expensive if done in other countries. And I think that is where we are very excited about the local environment.
But what happens if countries, and this includes emerging markets like India, start introducing digital transaction taxes? India plans to introduce a 1% one from July. How would this impact a payments business?
I mean, obviously, all that has an impact, and I think that has been the reason why investors have been even more careful about financial services and fintech companies right now because that kind of environment can really break their unit economics. At the end of the day, the difference between a SaaS company and pure technology company versus a financial services company is really the gross profit and the unit economics. And those gross profits usually depend on a lot of the existing banking infrastructure, right? So you cannot build a fintech on your own if you are not stepped on the existing banking infrastructure, on existing players. And those usually players rely on a huge volume to generate money. And if they're disrupted with high interest rates or changes in that environment or some policy changes, that can really wipe out whole sectors. So that is kind of something that needs to be done extremely carefully because the financial services market, unlike the SaaS companies, is very well connected. So everything is running in a single infrastructure and setup.
That's a very important point and warning that you made about how many of these projects are completely interlinked. And so, again, that raises the specter of a domino effect. So how could we get to a healthier ecosystem for realizing, again, the utility, the value, and the force for good possibilities? How can we get there? What are some ways that could be considered more regulation, more supervision, or healthy correction? What is needed?
I think the market correction, right? This is needed from time to time to really put some stress into the economy and to really just have the kind of the natural selection of companies that are built with the right foundations and the right unit economics. And if you have a business model where you're selling 70 cents for $1, that's not going to work. And we are starting to see some of those companies, for example, in the US, that were very heavy on, let's say, doing company cards and credit cards, financing startups, or some other players that are right now getting to a stage where they are not able to raise $1 billion, $2 billion constantly as capital that they need. And they need to get their models to work. And they now, after, let's say, 4 years, realize that, hey, we cannot build a really massive high technology company with a very low gross profit and interchange revenue.
Well, let's move on because we only have a few minutes left. In terms of cybersecurity, a really important topic which we'll be discussing more through the day here at Webit. Is cybersecurity for new payment platforms robust enough?
Well, I think the more we go into this decentralized model, the more we have people coming from, different backgrounds getting into the financial services and having more kind of open APIs and infrastructure to build things, the more conscious we have to be about compliance standards and security. I think this is a muscle that companies need to start flexing and building very early on to be able to be protected. And even companies like ours is under attack almost on a daily basis of people trying to, use the advantage of, us managing money and so on. So that is a serious thing, and I think we really need to have a very good discussion when we talk about regulation about this market. I'm not concerned about what you can do and what you cannot do, but really about anti-money laundering, about security and tampering into this environment. And I think that is some of the reasoning and the fundamentals behind, for example, the blockchain, saying that, hey, this is hard to break and so on. So there are some fundamentals there, but I think that is going to be the main focus of any upcoming regulation into that market.
And finally, in our last minute, let's talk about Web3, or as some people call Web 3.0. Are you excited about this? Is this really, again, something that could really be realized? Or is this just again, we're just talking about DeFi and how nascent that is. Is Web3, it's still too early to start talking about it?
No, I think we should talk about every technology trigger. And to me, the same as crypto, Web3 is another technology trigger that is coming up. I think we should definitely invest money into those kind of, obviously not personal money, but kind of structured money that are helping those companies do R&D and develop their concept, because I think there is obviously opportunity. But right now, at least for me, I'm trying to be very pragmatic, and if I cannot use it and touch it today, it is just kind of a nice thing to have.
So basically focusing on more real world versus metaverse possibilities at this stage.
Well, I think specifically for myself, we are targeting the B2B market. We are not targeting consumers, and it is very important that usually consumers are the first kind of technology adopters of any kind of trend, and the B2B companies are following into that. So we have, let's say, a few more years before we are disrupted by the Web3. So that is giving us some cushion.
Okay, good. That gives me a few more years to actually learn more about it too. Hristo Borisov, co-founder and CEO at Payhawk, thank you very much for your insights, and round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I think we can go.